Welcome to our channel. Today, we're exploring the extraordinary life of Audie Murphy, one of America's most decorated war heroes and a Hollywood icon. From his humble beginnings in rural Texas to his legendary actions on the battlefield during World War II, Murphy's story is one of unparalleled courage, resilience, and determination. But his post-war life, marked by both triumphs and struggles, reveals the complexities of a man who became a symbol of heroism. Join us as we delve into the remarkable journey of Audie Murphy and the legacy he left behind. Audie Leon Murphy was born on June 20th, 1925, in a small rural community called Kingston, Texas. And from the start, it was pretty clear life wouldn't be easy for him. He was the seventh of 12 kids born to Emmett Pat Murphy and his wife Josie. The family barely scraped by as sharecroppers. And during those years, right in the midst of the Great Depression, everyone had to pitch in to keep food on the table. Since there wasn't much time or money for formal schooling, Audie, who was called Leon by most folks back then, spent much of his boyhood either doing chores around the house, helping in the cotton fields, or picking up any odd jobs he could find. Early on, though, people saw something unusual in him. He was smart, determined, and always soaking up the world around him, even if he didn't get that knowledge from a classroom. When he had a free moment, he'd read whatever he could get his hands on, or listen to his uncle's stories from World War I. He may have been small in stature and short on formal education, but he had big dreams of escaping the crushing poverty he was born into. Audie's childhood was tough in just about every way you can imagine. The Murphy family was living day to day on land they didn't own, struggling with the same backbreaking labor that had worn down previous generations of sharecroppers. Their living conditions were harsh, barely enough to eat, no modern conveniences, and constant worry over the next harvest. On top of that, the Great Depression made everything more difficult. It's no wonder that, as a boy, Audie started to look beyond the farm for a better life. By the time he reached his mid-teens, Audie felt like he was in a losing battle. With so many mouths to feed, formal education slipped even further out of reach. He dropped out of school around age 15, working day and night to support his struggling family. In 1940, Emmett Murphy walked out on them altogether, leaving Audie's mother Josie to hold things together alone. But as hard as she worked, the burden was too heavy. She passed away in May 1941, leaving Audie and his siblings orphaned. Just like that, at 16, he was not only dirt poor, but also had to face the emotional turmoil of losing the one constant in his life. Her death hit him hard. He had always been a serious kid, but now he was feeling anger toward his absent father and an even stronger determination not to spend his life bent over a cotton field like so many Texans before him. A bold idea soon took hold. Maybe the military could be his way out. He'd thought about enlisting once he was old enough, and after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, America was fully involved in World War II. Even so, he was too young and definitely too small for the strict physical standards of places like the Marines or the paratroopers. He tried his luck anyway. When he first walked into a recruiting office, they took one look at him, a scrawny teenager barely old enough to shave, and turned him away. Even the Army said not yet. He had no intention of quitting, though. He bided his time, packed on a little more weight, hit his 18th birthday, and headed straight back to see if the Army would give him a shot. On June 30th, 1942, he was officially inducted and soon found himself at boot camp, diving headfirst into combat infantry training. Throughout basic training, Audie made a name for himself as an outstanding marksman. It turns out all those years hunting small game to help feed his family gave him a good eye and a steady hand. He also showed a natural discipline that didn't go unnoticed by his commanders. For once, being lean and scrappy worked in his favor. He moved quickly, shot accurately, and did exactly what he was told. Beyond that, there was a silent determination he carried, a seriousness that came from a life of hardship. Fellow recruits could see that soldiering meant more to him than a steady job or 3 square meals a day. In January 1943, he shipped out to North Africa. Before long, he was assigned to Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. That assignment would shape the rest of his service. When the Allies launched their invasion of Sicily, known as Operation Husky, on July 10, 1943, Audie and his fellow troops were right there in the middle of it. Sicily was his first real taste of combat, and he got a brutal awakening. The romantic picture of war he'd carried in his head was blown apart by the first bullets that whizzed past. Later, he'd talk openly about how scared he was that day, and how that fear never really left him. It just fueled him to keep going. Fighting their way north through Sicily, the Allied forces first encountered Italian troops, who tended to surrender more readily. But soon enough, the Germans showed up, and they were a whole different story. Well-trained, well-armed, and fiercely determined. Over the course of the Sicilian campaign, Audie learned respect for his enemy's capabilities. He also discovered his own knack for staying level-headed under immense pressure. By mid-August 1943, Sicily was secured, and the Allies moved on to the next phase, an amphibious landing at Salerno, followed by a push up the Italian peninsula. The 3rd Division would also see action around Naples, and eventually at the Anzio beachhead, which turned into a brutal, drawn-out fight. Audie ended up missing the initial landing at Anzio because of logistics, but he rejoined his unit soon after. They were stuck in a precarious situation on the beachhead, facing heavy artillery bombardment from German forces that had moved roughly 125,000 troops into the region. Young as he was, just 19, Audie found himself stepping into leadership roles when more senior officers were wounded. Even in the chaos, artillery shells raining down, men digging freezing, muddy foxholes, Audie kept his head, making the decisions that needed to be made. Still, the Allies were outmatched for a time and were forced to hold tight in defensive positions. Morale took a hit, living conditions were miserable, and the waiting dragged on for weeks and months. During that stretch, Audie's unwavering sense of duty caught higher-ups' attention. He was promoted to platoon leader and in March 1944 received his first major decoration, the Bronze Star Medal. When May 1944 rolled around, he added 2 more honors, the Combat Infantry Badge and an oak leaf cluster to his Bronze Star. The first recognized direct participation in ground combat, and the second was an official good job, soldier for how he conducted himself under enemy fire. By that time, everyone in the 3rd Division knew the name Audie Murphy. The summer of 1944 brought new orders. Operation Dragoon, the Allied landing on the southern coast of France. The plan was to move north and link up with other Allied units pressing from the west and north, effectively squeezing the German forces. Audie's battalion was part of that push, and it was there that he performed one of the feats that would go down in the history books. As they advanced up a hill, they encountered multiple German machine gun nests, guarding a large coastal gun. Audie took it upon himself to neutralize those nests, moving from one position to another with an almost reckless bravery. A close friend joined him, refusing to let Audie storm those nests alone. At one point, some German troops acted like they were surrendering, but when Audie's buddy stood up, the Germans gunned him down. Furious, Audie reacted instantly, taking out the German soldiers responsible. Then he just kept going, pushing up that hill, eliminating yet another machine gun nest, and clearing the entire area for the Allies. For this unbelievable bravery, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the second highest award for valor in the U.S. Army. At that point, you'd think he might slow down a little, but not Audie Murphy. On September 15, 1944, he was wounded for the first time, but that barely seemed to faze him. Within days of leaving the hospital, he was right back with his unit, itching for action. His leadership potential was obvious, and the Army wanted to promote him to second lieutenant. The trouble was, Audie felt deeply insecure about his lack of formal education, and he was loyal to the men he'd been fighting alongside. He didn't want to leave them and join the officer ranks. Eventually, after repeated acts of valor, including destroying yet another German machine gun position, he accepted the commission, but insisted he stay with Company B. In late October 1944, a bullet bounced off a tree before hitting him, causing a nasty wound that got infected and turned into gangrene. He spent a few days in agony waiting for evacuation. When he recovered, he returned to find his regiment preparing for a brutal mission along the German-French border. The weather was punishingly cold, and they didn't have the right gear. Food, ammo, and medical supplies often ran low. As if that wasn't bad enough, Audie got wounded again, a third time. Fortunately, it wasn't severe enough to send him straight to the hospital. But the company was decimated by then, reduced from over 200 men to fewer than 20. January 1945 brought one of the defining moments of his military career. Audie and the remnants of his outfit were told to hold a position against a much larger German force, about 200 enemy soldiers, supported by 6 tanks, while the Americans had fewer than 24 men and just 2 tank destroyers. Right away, one tank destroyer skidded off the road and had to be abandoned, while the other was hit by German artillery. Things looked pretty hopeless, but Audie got on the radio, directing artillery fire at the enemy, while personally firing his rifle to slow their advance. Then he realized the damaged tank destroyer was on fire and about 10 yards away. Its .50 caliber machine gun seemed operational. Without hesitating, he scrambled onto the burning vehicle, manned that gun, and continued ordering artillery strikes as he blasted away at the German infantry. For half an hour, some say longer, he fought practically alone, killing or wounding dozens of Germans. Finally, the enemy broke off the attack, giving up more ground than they'd hoped. Audie, exhausted and dazed, hopped off just before the thing exploded. In the following weeks, the 3rd Infantry Division kept pressing the Germans east toward the Rhine River. By late February, most enemy forces west of the Rhine had surrendered. Audie, now a national hero in the making, earned another promotion to first lieutenant. Because he was so valuable, and let's face it, so lucky, his superiors were eager to keep him out of the most dangerous frontline positions. They assigned him as a liaison officer. That, of course, didn't stop him from showing up at the front whenever he thought his presence might help. There's even a story of him running to the forward area just so he could guide Company B to safety. He was seemingly unstoppable. By the spring of 1945, Germany's defeat was on the horizon. Audie was still itching to get in on the action whenever possible, but eventually he got a bit of downtime. He took a train to the French Riviera, hoping to catch his breath, then headed off to rejoin Company B near Salzburg, Austria, where the regiment set up its headquarters after the German surrender. It was there, on June 2, 1945, just a few weeks shy of his 21st birthday, that he officially received the Medal of Honor from Lieutenant General Alexander Patch, who commanded the 7th Army. By war's end, Audie had accumulated 37 medals in total, including every major U.S. decoration for valor, plus some from France and Belgium. He became known as the most decorated U.S. soldier of World War II, a legend before he'd even left his teens behind. Returning home to the United States, Audie was in for a shock. He'd gone off to war as a scrawny Texas farm kid and come back the biggest war hero America had ever seen. Magazines put his face on their covers, and parades were held in his honor. Quiet and a bit shy at heart, he didn't crave the spotlight, but he was grateful for the appreciation people showed. However, behind all the cheering crowds and flashy ceremonies, he carried an invisible burden. Combat had left deep scars, nightmares, flashbacks, and a constant feeling of guilt over friends who never made it back. But at the time, post-traumatic stress disorder wasn't a recognized medical diagnosis. They called it battle fatigue or shell shock, and there wasn't much help for it. Feeling restless and out of place, Audie headed to Hollywood near the end of 1945. He was young, good-looking in a boyish way, and his war record was a major selling point for film studios that sensed patriotic moviegoers would want to see him. Over the next 2 decades, he appeared in a string of low-budget westerns and war films, mostly B-movies, though he did have a couple of standout performances. One of his most praised roles came in 1951 when he starred in The Red Badge of Courage, directed by John Huston. That film earned strong reviews, and Audie's performance showed that he had some real acting chops when given the right material. Then came To Hell and Back in 1955, which was based on his own autobiography. Playing himself, Audie brought such authenticity to the role that the movie became a box office smash and remains one of the more famous portrayals of World War II. Despite those successes, Hollywood never quite satisfied him. He was a decent actor, but you could sense he was never fully at ease in the movie business. He'd been through so much on the battlefield that make-believe gunfights and phony saloon brawls must have felt trivial sometimes. That didn't mean he didn't try. He learned to ride horses better, improved his acting skills, and even showed some talent for songwriting in the early 1960s. He wrote or co-wrote a handful of country western songs that made it onto the charts, working with well-known country artists of the time. Audie suffered from nightmares, insomnia, and a near-constant feeling of being on alert. He often slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. He later admitted to struggling with memories of the men he'd killed and the comrades he'd lost. He felt a heavy responsibility for the survival of his company in many of the battles. Over the years, doctors prescribed sleeping pills, and like so many veterans of that era, he ended up dependent on them. Drugs were one of the few ways he could dull the inner turmoil. Even with his fame and a certain amount of financial success, he found himself restless and depressed, at times bankrupt, and eventually divorced from his first wife, Wanda Hendricks, whom he'd married in 1949. That marriage fell apart by 1950, though he later remarried in 1951 to Pamela Archer and had 2 sons, Terry and James. In the midst of his post-war struggles, he also tried to use his voice to talk about the psychological cost of combat. He spoke openly about how veterans could be haunted by what they'd seen and done long after the shooting stopped. But in those days, public understanding of PTSD was limited. The country was moving on to new conflicts like Korea and eventually Vietnam, and there wasn't much appetite to dwell on the mental health issues of returning GIs. Even so, Audie's candor about what he'd gone through helped pave the way for more open discussions later on. As the years went by, Audie never really found that peaceful, quiet life he might have imagined back on the farm. He always seemed to be searching for a sense of normalcy. He performed in various films, some more successful than others, and occasionally popped up at patriotic events where he was asked to speak, but much of the time he battled personal and financial problems. In 1968, he declared bankruptcy. He also had some run-ins with gambling. Life after the military was often one roller coaster after another. Tragically, on May 28, 1971, Audie was traveling on a private plane for a business trip. The plane went down in fog and rain near Roanoke, Virginia, killing everyone on board, including Audie and 5 other men. He was just 45 years old. The news shocked a nation that still revered him as the most decorated soldier of the Second World War. After all he'd been through, machine gun nests, artillery shells, tanks, near misses, and one life-or-death situation after another, it seemed especially cruel that he would lose his life in a peacetime plane crash. He was laid to rest with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. His gravesite quickly became one of the most visited spots at Arlington, second only to President John F. Kennedy's. Typically, Medal of Honor recipients have gold lettering on their headstones, but at Audie's request, because he was always modest about drawing attention to himself, his stone is etched in standard lettering. People still go there to pay tribute, to leave flags and flowers, and to remember what genuine courage and sacrifice look like. Even today, there's an Audie Murphy Memorial Veterans Hospital in San Antonio, Texas, named in his honor. In his hometown region, folks remember him as the boy who grew up with almost nothing, yet rose to become a national hero. His birthday, June 20th, has often been marked by special tributes and local events, especially in Texas, where he's considered one of the state's greatest sons. The Audie Murphy American Cotton Museum in Greenville, Texas, has a whole section dedicated to his life and career, including items from his films and personal memorabilia. Roads, schools, and even parts of highways have been named after him, especially throughout Texas and other parts of the South. In 2013, the Texas legislature officially designated a portion of Highway 69 in Hunt County as the Audie Murphy Memorial Highway. Aside from the Medal of Honor and the Distinguished Service Cross, he received 2 Silver Stars, one of which was for leading men across a river under heavy fire, the Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars, one with a V device for valor, and 3 Purple Hearts for wounds received in action. From foreign governments, he was honored with the French Legion of Honor, the French Croix de Guerre with Silver Star and Palm, and the Belgian Croix de Guerre. That's in addition to the Combat Infantry Badge and various campaign medals that marked his participation in multiple European theaters. People who knew him say he was never one to brag, and he actually felt uncomfortable being singled out for awards when so many others had fought and died. He dedicated his autobiography to hell and back, to the American soldier, making it clear that in his eyes, the real glory belonged to all those who had served, especially those who never made it home. That humility endeared him even more to the public, and it also provided a stark contrast to his on-screen image in westerns and war films, where he often played a gunslinging hero. His movie career, while not exactly packed with blockbusters, did have a few highlights besides To Hell and Back and The Red Badge of Courage. He starred in Night Passage, 1957, alongside James Stewart, and guest starred in TV shows of the era. He was also in The Quiet American, 1958, though he had a supporting role. His westerns, like Gunsmoke, 1953, not to be confused with the TV series, Ride Clear of Diablo, 1954, and Drums Across the River, 1954, were popular with audiences who enjoyed that genre, even if they didn't quite reach classic status. Audie Murphy's life was a testament to courage, determination, and the lasting effects of war. His heroism on the battlefield and his efforts to share his story through film and music continue to inspire generations. Though his life ended tragically, his legacy as a soldier, actor, and advocate for veterans' lives on. If you found this story of Audie Murphy as compelling as we did, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible tales of remarkable figures. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.